So I've had many homecomings in my life, some of them more memorable than others. One of the first memorable homecomings I had was coming back from studying abroad. I studied abroad in Australia for 6 months in college, and in the meantime, my parents had decided in those 6 months that they were going to move from my childhood home. I'd lived there since the time I was 4. I had come home for my first 2 years of college there. I had lived there after high school when I had kind of a gap year. And all of a sudden, my parents were telling me over the phone that I was going to come home to a different house. So I arrived back home, and I had a little bit of a grieving process because I never got to say goodbye to that physical place where I would create imaginary worlds in the sandbox in the backyard where my dad had built it, and I'd learned to ride that bike without the training wheels in the alleyway, and I had mostly unsuccessfully tried to get over being afraid of the dark as soon as I got my own room. And I just never got to say goodbye to that physical place. But what I also realized in that homecoming was that physical place isn't all of home. And my parents were still there, my sister was still there, and home is also about the people. So I went back to college and I had another semester and a half. And my second memorable homecoming was to that house, and I was coming home this time to finish my last semester of college, and I needed to sort of grind it out. I was a student teacher and I wasn't making any money, so I didn't want to be paying rent, so my parents let me move back in. But the thing about this homecoming was I was coming home with a broken heart. My first, devastating, and my parents welcomed me back, and they gave me my own room again, and they fed me, and they let me sleep all summer. And they just let me heal. They let me heal, and it reinforced to me that coming home is really coming home to the people that sustain you. What's really amazing about that is the guy who broke my heart, my parents actually let him move in with us about a year later, and 3 months after that we got married. So that was the redemptive story of my parents right there. The redemption from moving out of my childhood home. So then I bought a house, and that was my first home that I owned, and I lived there for 8 years, and that home was something totally different because I was building that home with my own blood, sweat, tears, and lots of money and time, and I was building it with a person, and I loved it. I loved being a homeowner. I had gardens, and we redid everything, and home to me then was that meld of the physical place, the ownership, and the person, the new family. But when my marriage started to crumble, and I realized that I was going to lose all of that, home and homecoming became something so different. And every day I came home, my home was filled with tension and anxiety, and it wasn't that sigh of relief that I was used to with the homecoming. And there wasn't that assurance that there was something familiar coming after it. And so homecoming became a painful or traumatic event. And when I moved and sold that home, and when I moved to my own place, it was the first time I'd ever lived alone. So I didn't have the physical place that was familiar, and I didn't have the people that used to be familiar. And I had to rediscover what home meant so that I could have the homecoming that I really craved. And what's interesting about that is it took a while. It took a while for me to redefine home and to really feel like I could come home to a homecoming. Even in this new place, there was just so much anxiety. I wasn't used to being alone. I wasn't used to living in some place that I didn't create or didn't have my stamp on it. But what I've learned is something that almost pains me to say, because as an English teacher, a former English teacher, I really hate cliches. They used to be on my dead word wall, and I used to tell my students you can never use them. But see, high school students, to your point, they don't know they're cliches because they haven't been around long enough, so I had to kind of teach them. So I really hate cliches, but what I found in this whole process of home and rediscovering home was that I finally understood what it meant when they said home is where your heart is. Because your heart sometimes is attached to physical things. And I have all these physical things from all these places that I've lived, and they're in my new place. And they always find their place in a new windowsill or a new shelf. And it's also about people. And even if there's not people living with you, I have all these physical reminders of the people who still hold me and sustain me and love me. And they're the pictures that remind me that those people are also part of my home. And so I finally come to rest on a wonderful ending, which is Home is where your heart is. Thank you. Thank you.